Okay, I expect a few more people may filter in as we get going, but we'll go ahead and get started. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, wherever you are in the world. We do have some people, we have people from all over the states, and I see someone from Colombia, which is fantastic. Um, Welcome to today's webinar, where we're going to be exploring AI's role in shaping learning and work. I'm Sean Michael Morris. I'm the Vice President of Academics at Course Hero, and it's my absolute pleasure to welcome you. It goes without saying that generative AI has already had an impact on education and the workplace, from people using chatbots to assist them with their work, to coders using AI to build digital tools faster and with more accuracy, and from teachers adopting AI technologies as course assistants, to students using ChatGPT for ideas, outlines, new perspectives when writing papers. In a very short time, AI has made its way into how we think about the future of education and work. Today, we're joined by a panel of folks who have been using AI, watching the AI landscape in education, and considering its impact on learning, teaching practice, and educational policy. When we're talking about the impact of AI on learning and work, it's good to have as many perspectives available as possible. And that actually includes your all perspectives in the audience. We definitely want to be hearing from you as well today. As any good moderator should, I've got some questions prepared, but there's actually no telling really where the conversation will take us. A couple of quick notes before we get started. First, if you haven't already, please do introduce yourself in the chat. It's always good to hear from everyone. And next, as we go along, please post questions either in the chat or in the Q&A, which you'll find at the bottom of the screen. We'll make time for questions as we go along and also toward the end of our time. So now, without further ado, I'd love to get things rolling. Let's start with some quick introductions from our panelists. Margaret, if I can ask you to start us off, then Bridget, then Kevin.
Hey y'all, good to see you. My name is Margaret Floyd. I teach English and am a department chair at a small rural school in South Carolina. We're Central Carolina Technical College. Glad to be here.
Hi everyone, my name is Bridget Colaccio. I am joining you from Chicago. I work at Loyola University Chicago, where I teach in our School of Social Work. And I also direct our faculty center for Ignatian Pedagogy, where we do pedagogical support and training for faculty across the university.
And I'm Kevin Johnston. I'm from the U.S. Department of Education. I work in our Office of Educational Technology, where I help co-lead our AI team. So I have a cool day job where I get to think about AI in education all day, every day. The gist of it.
That's great. Awesome. Cool. So we're going to go ahead and start with some questions. A lot of we've been sort of observing at Course Hero. We've been teaching about AI. We've been working with teachers around AI, and it kind of runs the gamut in terms of the way that people are perceiving it, using it, not using it. And I would love to kind of actually just starting actually with Bridget and Margaret. How are you using AI in the classroom, or how are you seeing teachers that you work with use it? And also, have you seen attitudes toward AI change or not change in the time since the release of ChatGPT?
Sure, I can go
Oh,
ahead.
I'm sorry, Bridget, you go ahead.
I'll jump in maybe for the first half and then we can toggle back and forth. So, you know, the dawn of particularly ChatGPT, but other generative AI tools came as a surprise, I think, to a lot of our colleagues. And so though in my role, though, in helping my colleagues to improve their teaching and to think about pedagogy really intentionally, I was in a position then to think about my own teaching and how we were going to use that tool and help our colleagues figure out how to use the tool. So at first, it was, you know, participating in trainings actually through Course Hero and other places, but to learn how to incorporate and think about AI as a tool. This was really important in the work that I've been doing in my own classrooms, but also with colleagues, is to help us stay connected to the purpose of education being making sure that we are leading our students through towards their learning outcomes that we have in place, and thinking then of AI as a tool to get there. So some of the things that I've been doing is crafting some assignments to help students get some acclimation to AI. We've talked a bit about AI literacy, and students need to know how to use it and use it properly. So finding ways to incorporate the use of generative AI into assignments where students are being prompted to do so explicitly, knowing that they might want to play around with it anyhow. So making it intentional is a way to hopefully have conversations about artificial intelligence, as opposed to letting students just play around and maybe fumble themselves, but to guide them through how do you use prompts to answer certain questions and to revise maybe work that they are working on currently. So using it intentionally in assignments to get ideas started. I've crafted some assignments where the students have AI answer a prompt, maybe for a short essay, and then they critique it. So this is where we're getting at some of their critical thinking, which is actually the learning outcome by having them, maybe they didn't create the content, but they're critiquing the content that is that comes out of ChatGPT, for instance. So that's just one example of how I'm using it in my classroom. We're encouraging other faculty to do the same. I'm also seeing faculty colleagues using it to help with lesson planning, where they have their own ideas, their own outcomes that they have in mind, maybe some course materials that they intend to use, and helping to ensure that they are crafting learning outcomes that are going to get them, but then get their students sort of where they want them to go. I'll pause there. Margaret, you can share, and then we can go back to the other piece of the question.
A lot of similarities that how the conversation has changed, particularly in my department. My department is English and speech. So we were just chugging along, grading papers, and then there's an essay that's published that says, don't worry, the essay is dead. You don't have a job. It's over, right? And then we were sent home for Christmas break, and it was just kind of depressing. But then, we rallied, we got through COVID, we can do this. And we just started engaging in those conversations, which are so necessary. And not just among those in my department, but also reaching out to our dean, our VP. We had folks on staff who were pretty keen to engage in this conversation, just to see, where do we go from here? What do we want to do as a college? How do we want to approach this? And the good news is that we all agree it's a necessary conversation, and it's something that's here to stay, and we want to do it together. And that's not always the case for a lot of our colleagues. They may not feel like they do have folks who are engaging with the technology, and they would love to have a buddy to kind of work with them on it. But we certainly did, and that was really helpful. So then we started engaging students in that conversation too. And what we discovered is that students are very excited to take more ownership of their education and to talk about this technology, because they feel like they're stuck in between a hard place and a rock, right? They feel like on one hand, they're getting the message that they can't use the technology. It's cheating. Don't do it. But then they see that industries are using it and that they need to know this. So they feel like they're going to be left behind if they're not using the technology. So engaging students in that conversation, engaging everybody in that conversation, and then within the classroom, unfortunately, we have a bit of a snafu. Many of our students are high school students with dual enrollment and early college. So they have school-issued laptops that block access to generative AI tools. And so what we do is we don't require the use of it, but we demonstrate it at every possible turn. And of course, students may unofficially use it on their phones. But I have to say that there's a big change between what we were seeing initially, where students were just plopping in a prompt, and now students are actually engaging with the process a little more. They feel more empowered and they feel a little more confident with how to use these tools. I also really love using generative AI to support student success skills. So many of our students are attending college for the first time. this feels very fish out of water for them, and they have a little bit of imposter syndrome and high anxiety. And it can be very helpful to draft an email to a staff member, your advisor, your faculty member that you're kind of scared of, and you don't know how to approach it. So we talk about how we can use the tool for that, taking notes, organizing your notes, developing your own study guides, making checklists. There is a fabulous support, as you said, Bridget, as opposed to a surrogate that's going to circumvent learning. It can generate critical thinking. It can generate these conversations, and it can be a lot of fun to do that.
And I think that one of the things that I'm seeing in terms of change, that the initial reaction, certainly from the institutional standpoint, obviously ran the gamut. Certainly there were some people who were excited and really curious and diving into using it themselves as instructors and exploring it with their students. And then there were people on the opposite end who were very fearful and felt like the most important response was, how do we prevent this? And working to create more policies for catching the use of generative AI. And our center took the perspective that while policies are important and it needs to happen and they need to be updated so that plagiarism policies talk about AI, it needs to be in there, certainly. But instead of landing in the fear zone and staying there, that we really wanted to help people move back toward, okay, a tool for education. What do we want our students to learn? How do we want them to be engaging with the material that is really the point of their education and their skill development, which is really the point of their education, and who they are becoming as human beings, which is the point of their education, and how can AI in all of its forms, generative and otherwise, support those outcomes generally, and helping people kind of get out of the fear was an important part of that. And I think that there is emerging even folks who felt very nervous and compliance driven are starting to come a little bit toward the middle.
And there are a lot of valid, I'm sorry to interrupt, but there are a lot of valid concerns being brought up in terms of, oh, well, students will lose their critical thinking, right? Or students will circumvent learning by just using this technology. And I would say that we've had avenues for students to do that over the years, and it hasn't ever really been that successful. And if you've played with these tools, you know that a lot of the time the creation or the generation is kind of word salad. And it's pretty easy to see. So it's actually opening up probably uncomfortable conversations that we haven't engaged with in higher ed for a little bit, in terms of more directly talking about what are our values. You were talking about, like, what is it that we're doing in the classroom? What are we here for? What are they learning? And these are powerful conversations that can feel a little awkward, but I think it's definitely a conversation worth having. And the great news is that having this technology is sort of re-energizing many of us to have those conversations.
I think that's actually a really important point to make, is that this technology has caused a lot of conversations to take place that weren't taking place otherwise. And I wanted to just make a note. Actually, Bridget, you said something about, that becoming more human, understanding themselves as human beings is part of college education. And it reminds me of what of some of the guidance from the Department of Education around keeping human in the loop, right? And making sure that this technology always is responding to what human needs actually are. And I'd be curious, actually, just to turn it over to you, Kevin, really quickly, if you can talk a little bit about what sorts of trends. I know that you've been doing a lot of like listening groups and that sort of thing. I'd be curious what trends you're seeing with regards to use of AI in classrooms.
Yeah, I'll start with the point you were just mentioning around our May 2023 report. It's called AI and the Future of Teaching and Learning. I can drop it in the chat after I'm done with this comment, or if someone gets to it before then, great. And that idea of a human in a loop has been kind of really resonant across all of the different settings that we've engaged in. So we came up with this metaphor of people should view AI as more of an electric bike than a robot vacuum. So the robot vacuum, you give it a couple of rough parameters and then you like let it loose to do its thing. And in the electric bicycle, a human is in control of all of the critical decisions that are being made. And the AI is simply helping them achieve those goals, in a more expeditious fashion. And so that's kind of been our kind of rallying cry, is like, let's not just have that vision, but let's find ways for us to shape systems. So that's their kind of MO, is that they're designed to be electric bicycles. I think that's like a majority. I'm not saying there aren't narrow things where you could have robot vacuums and they would be helpful, but I think our overarching frame is that we should be thinking about it this way. And I think when we do that, and you think about this like partner that's helping you do things, it becomes a lot less about like runaway and a lot more about interaction. And so that's been really, we've had a lot of reception to that. I think people enjoy that. I think when you get one level deeper and they go like, but what does that look like? And when is it too much? And when is it too, like, and when is, how we're going to check if it's wrong and all those kind of things. Then we're like, okay, this is the struggle, right? And so very much find a lot of resonance to this idea that teachers need a buddy, they need a task force, faculty need someone to give them what we refer to as kind of shoulder to shoulder support. Where like, we're doing this together, we're figuring it out. Nobody has like the answers here. So like, let's wrestle with these. I remember the first time I was using generative AI and I was like, is this cheating for me? Like, it's a really important thing to think about. And I was like, I didn't end up copying and pasting the sentence and putting it somewhere. I like used it as inspiration for a different sentence. And I think that's interesting. Like like I said, I think about this all day, every day, and I still couldn't quite bring myself to grab that one. And so a lot of like thinking and analysis that needs to go on to figure out what those spots are. I think we had so we've had listening sessions with both K-12 educators
Looks
and
like we
higher
lost
ed.
audio.
Oh no.
Are you back?
Yeah,
Yeah, we lost your audio.
Oh, can you hear me?
Nope.
No.
Yeah. Oh, now you're back. Nope.
Am I back?
Now you're back.
I'm back. Cool.
Yep.
No headset. We've had listening sessions with both K-12 folks and higher ed folks. Over 100 K-12 educators and about 50 higher ed folks so far. And one thing that was very interesting that came up in the higher ed session is there's a lot of this kind of focus on faculty's, academic freedom. And so with that comes a kind of like pedagogical freedom and a kind of resonance of the idea that faculty need the liberty to be able to restrict its use when it is pedagogically appropriate and tied to a specific learning objective, which is to say, if you were to do this in this situation, I actually do think you're very likely to undercut your own learning, but also have a kind of broad openness to what it would look like, what appropriate use looks like. And so I think in that it's a lot about demystifying the technology and not making it kind of just like opaque bans or never statements, but saying like, here's what we've observed, here's the feedback we've got, that's what's driving this. Here's the narrow concern. We've seen really, I think, appropriate concerns about transmission of intellectual property. And if you put it especially into like open public platforms, like it's very likely that you could lose access to that intellectual property, right? And so like that's an appropriate concern, and a narrowly applied restriction on use could be appropriate. And so it's a lot about making it clear that that's what's driving this, not some broad fear about all students cheating or something like that. So those are some of my higher level reflections.
That's great. Yeah, and I'm interested in the electric bike metaphor and the idea that of partnering with AI. And I'm curious, and this is not one of the planned questions that I had, but I'd be curious, Margaret and Bridget, I think especially how that relates to the idea of AI literacy, which I think there's also a reason to contrast that with AI mastery, which is like learning how to use the tools appropriately, doing prompt engineering, that sort of thing. where AI literacy is really maybe about this partnership piece, and how do we partner with AI? I'd be curious if you have any reflections on that idea with regards to literacy.
So any conversations concerning literacy would probably require first a check-in with regards to what matters and what you're doing and what your purpose is. And I think that's what a number of my colleagues and I are doing at the start of classes, is making sure we take time to check in with students to say, well, what matters to you? What do you need? What are your values? And so students will say something like, well, I want to feel like my voice matters. Awesome. I can use that, because what that means is you want to know that when you say something, we hear you, we work with it equitably, without judgment, and fairly, and we give you proper credit, right, for those ideas. And so that can translate to a healthy, productive conversation concerning the use of academic integrity, ethical responsibility, right, and what that looks like. And that is closely tied to having AI literacy. It's not a matter of you jumping through hoops to participate in a bunch of assignments that I've created. It's a matter of recognizing that this is a fabulous tool that can help you learn these skills and then transfer those skills not only in your other classes, but also when you get on the job. We have a local industry. We know that several local industries are buying subscriptions to AI tools. I've heard of one example where employees were sent and emailed a one-page training on prompt engineering, and the person I spoke to just felt so left out and so overwhelmed. But having that exposure to the technology and talking about how we use tools to stay resilient and to stay, up to date on what's going on in our fields, that's a larger conversation that we have to engage students in, instead of saying, this is a tool, let me show you how to use it. So there is a big difference between literacy and, as you said, learning the logistics of it.
I guess I would add that when we think about really broad scale, what are we trying to achieve with education, and thinking about the development of knowledge, skills, dispositions, values, and just sort of like growth as a person, that literacy falls in a couple of those categories. Certainly, as you were saying, Margaret, about skills, that this is now a new skill that people need to have access to and to be able to practice. So we can't assume that they're going to be able to, just because it's fast and it's relatively easy to use, doesn't mean that there is not some development of skill that's required. So the literacy around, just because it spits out answers doesn't mean that they're good answers, right? So we've been working on that for a while, people educating from K-12 and even in higher ed. How do you know that an online source is a good source to use? And how do you tell the difference between an opinion piece in a magazine and an empirical data-driven piece from a journal? That we've been working with students on their skills for a very long time. So here's just a new landscape to be doing that. But there's also, I think, part of literacy around disposition and our kind of approach and our opinions and attitudes about a tool. And that also requires some guidance, I think, from the K-12, but then also in higher education, that we don't want to help our students to feel more scared of things that they're unfamiliar with. And that is a part of maybe dispositional or attitudinal literacy, that we have a role to play in supporting our students in their growth and development. So I think that in all of those areas, we can and should be thoughtful. Maybe there's some disciplines where the knowledge of this, computer science, or maybe we've got some colleagues in chemistry and some of the other hard sciences, where this is playing into the sort of knowledge of generative AI is related to their content area. So that's a piece of it too. But even for those of us who are in fields that are far away content-wise from this. There's lots of these areas of literacy, I think, that we're responsible for. And this is not something that we can just kind of stick our head in the sand and decide, oh, I'm not going to do this, or I'm not going to be a part of this. I think that the knee jerk is maybe natural, but as educators, we need to be committed to doing our own education and to be able to be prepared to support our students.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. And I really like the sort of attitudinal, almost attitudinal literacy of sort of how do we want to even approach this? How do we want to be thinking about this? I think there's still a lot of fear-based, especially when it comes to workforce, people thinking about being replaced in the workforce by AI, their jobs being eliminated because AI can do it faster, better, whatever. There's actually a question in the chat about the potential implications of AI-driven automation on the future job market, and how can educators prepare students for careers in a rapidly changing workforce. But the follow-up question to that was, it's not just because AI is fast and reliable, but how can AI be utilized to personalize learning experiences for students with diverse learning styles and needs? So I think that there's a sort of combination question there in terms of how are we preparing individuals to go into the workforce? And I actually kind of want to just open up this question too around personalized learning, because this is sort of the elephant in the room when it comes to AI. And personalized learning has always been sort of the holy grail of digital education. And a lot of people are saying AI is going to get us there. And I'd be curious to hear any thoughts around what you're seeing with regards to personalized learning, if you feel like this is actually going to get us closer to truly personalized learning, and whether that's going to help prepare people for a workforce situation. And I'm open to anybody answering.
I can jump in first. One thought here, Mackenzie has a really, I think, a great report on generative AI and the future of work. If you haven't looked at it, I have referenced it a couple of times. They have a nice graphic in there about high touch, low touch industries, and then also kind of like expected employment increases and along, so like that's the graphic. And there are a number of industries that are high touch and expected employment increases. So like very important areas, right? This is places where you're going to get resiliency and you're going to get a lot of AI impact. And that's like medicine and STEM. The law is actually kind of above the threshold, which I think is interesting. It has quite a bit of touch, but also a slight lift. STEM and medicine have more lift in terms of future opportunities. And then also like, some in the lower right that are in kind of here where they're high touch, but decline. And that's a place where we've got to be thinking about how do we help people transition across industries. We've never done it really well. It's hard. You have to move people from one context to another because it's easier to transition within an industry, but across industries is quite difficult. And so thinking about what kind of programs does your university have to support those students? How long is it going to take? What kind of how are you going to help signal to people both their intake process and their potential opportunities for employment, but without misleading them, because that's not kosher either, right? So like a lot of that thinking has to be done in order to be responsive to that. And then on personalized learning, I think we're seeing certainly like, a lot of improvement in this area, like toward this area. Like if you take a system, that's based on previous models and compare like the conversational flow, the inference, all of that kind of stuff is just not even close. Like the dynamism of these current systems is really impressive. Now, whether or not that translates into really effective use in the classroom depends a lot on like really particulars of system engineering, I think, and then also faculty development. Because like if a new technology is applied to a classroom and no faculty know how to use it, does it make a sound? And the answer is probably not. So like, how are we building that human capacity to be able to leverage these tools effectively? And I think that is like a very localized question. It's going to take a lot of people moving in concert to make that a reality.
Any other thoughts on the personalized learning front, Bridget?
Yeah, I just, I'm not sure exactly how it's going to come together, so I'm going to start talking anyway. But because I think that there's something that I keep thinking as we're talking here, that there are movements in pedagogical trends and development that are pulling us in a direction that of what education looks like. And I want to be careful about using buzzwords that might move us in a direction you don't want to go in, Sean. But we work a lot in anti-oppressive education. And what does that look like to be balancing power in the classroom, to be sourcing information from underrepresented voices and communities, to enabling access for students based on differential learning styles, based on different backgrounds, based on life experience and all of these things. And what's interesting in my mind is how perhaps AI is going to accelerate some of the ways that we have to contend with those things, because in a way there is some leveling of a playing field in terms of access to information, in terms of access to content, that in the past, and sort of the old ways of doing education, a stand and deliver, sage on the stage, sort of, I'm going to just empty what I know and then you regurgitate it back to me. We've known for a long time that that's actually not the most effective way to do education. It's not the way that people learn best, and it's not the way that we can make education accessible across differences. So AI now is maybe lifting the floor in a way where there's another level of leveling the playing field, where we have to contend with personalization, where some people have just ignored that and thought, well, I'm just going to keep doing it the way that I do it. And yep, I'm going to give this same old essay assignment that I've always given and expect the same thing back. So I think AI will force that conversation, but then it will provide opportunities. I think for some colleagues who may be a little bit more recalcitrant in their ways of approaching things, that AI can be helpful. What is a creative way to do this assignment that I've always done? Give me 10 ideas of how I could make this different, where students are creating videos and they're creating a podcast and they're making an animation to demonstrate what they know about organic chemistry, as opposed to only taking this exam. How can we talk about, I always pick on Shakespeare, I feel like, when I'm talking about this, but how many essays do we need on the main themes of Romeo and Juliet? There are millions of those already. So what's something new that we can ask our students to engage in? And because it's new and different, it will necessarily be personally different for every student. So I think that, I don't know that that answers your question, but it does sort of push us in this direction. I think that education has been going, but now we might have to confront, for some, might have to confront it sooner than they were maybe ready.
And for many, that's a scary conversation, because it's the unknown, and moving away from what is comfortable. But it is also re-energizing and exciting to see the different ways that we can have students partner with us in their own education. So to have the tools, if there is equitable access to the tools, not all students do, right? A lot of my dual enrollment students do not. But if there is equitable access, then students could be paired up and they could create, after being given parameters for an assignment, they could create the assignment. And then students have multiple assignments to choose from to demonstrate their learning within a particular unit. And then they can even be used to create maybe some criteria that's associated with the rubric. They can be more involved and take better ownership of their learning, which students are showing that they're absolutely ready for. And outside of the classroom, it just encourages that a sense of creativity. I have a student that I just ran into. She's so young and she's a budding artist. And she tells me that she posted one of her sketches online and people were like, "Let's say I generated, you messed up the hands or something." And she said, "No, I'm just a sucky drawer. I'm figuring this out for the first time." And so now I said, well, I bet that's having you rethink, what does it look like to be an artist in this agency? She said, yeah, absolutely. I'm going to do more performative exhibitions where people watch me engage in creating of art. And that's something that's a value, right? Creativity and resilience and coming back to the table with a new idea. And it may not be readily obvious how that transfers to some of our trades, but those are conversations that need to be had with those specific groups. And that comes through. We know that students do really well when they feel emotionally supported. So for all the folks who are saying, oh, you're not going to have a job in a few years, you'll be replaced. Students don't want that. They may want the support, they may want the help, but they're not getting the emotional support that a faculty member can provide by engaging with a chatbot. And we have studies, recent studies that show that there are increased depression reports with students in high anxiety. So it's a great opportunity to fuel that creativity and also to bring the human back into this conversation and establish those relationships.
If I can jump back in, that's really where I was going to go next, Margaret, is in thinking about preparing our students for their future and their careers. And for a long time, I remember even, 5, 6, 7, 8 years ago, saying to students, you're coming to have an education here for a job that probably doesn't exist yet. And so how in the world are we going to prepare you for that? We're going to give you access to skills and knowledge that's broad-based, and we're going to help you form relationships with people, because it's through relationships with people that you're going to learn in the future, and that you're going to know how to ask for help, and that you're going to be able to learn from a field, a trade, a discipline that you have not been exposed to before, and you're going to lean on other people to learn about that. And so I think that, again, this is, there's a mental health crisis among students of all ages, and increasingly then of the adult population as they get older. And so what do we need? We need more connection, actually, with each other. And so in my mind, so how can we be strategic about what can AI do, some of the mundane elements of someone's job, so that you can focus on the connection, so that you can focus on the creativity, so you can focus on the things that AI can't do, and leaning into that is so important. So that is, I think, on our minds as we think about helping our instructors prepare students for their future careers, is that we are preparing them with skills, we're preparing them to know how to ask for help, to know how to identify when I've reached my edge and I don't know the answer from here, and I'm not afraid to say, I don't know what to do next. All of those elements of the sort of psychosocial element of being a worker, that we cannot be automated. And we have to help people realize that we're not expecting them to be perfect. Young people, with everything happening instantaneously, sort of feel like everything should be right all the time. So I feel like these soft skills are actually where there's a huge maybe gap and opportunity, and that sort of like self-awareness literacy that we need to add to the mix here to help prepare our students for whatever work they're going to be doing. Those are the things that are transferable, I think.
I think that's a really great point. And Kiki in the chat actually brought up something about skills on humanity that need to be enhanced more. That essentially we haven't really invested in that a whole lot, just in terms of human connection. And I know that Julie Freeland Fisher from the Christensen Institute says, that until we are measuring human connection as a valid thing, as a reason to like, until we incentivize it through metrics, essentially, we're not going to be investing in human connection between teachers and students. And I think that's the thing that I think I like the most about what's happening with AI, is that people are recognizing, oh, we need to turn back to humans. because this isn't gonna solve our problem. A chatbot's not gonna give us what a human being can give us. And I think more and more people are starting to recognize that. I do have another question, and we have some questions in the chat too that I wanna get to. But maybe actually I'll jump to those first. There's concerns around plagiarism ethics, and it's a huge field, right? I think specifically plagiarism. Douglas was asking about, was saying essentially that using the label of plagiarism when AI is used to do some writing isn't necessarily the best label. But then there's also concerns about just ethics in general and kind of what happens ethically when we're dealing with a culture that's using AI and suddenly we don't know what information is real. We don't know what images are real. And how do we begin to grapple with that with our students? What's that literacy look like for students? So if you have some thoughts about that, let's tackle that one a little bit, just in terms of that ethical position and whether you're seeing those conversations happening in where you're working.
Well, if you're having your students develop the academic integrity policy, then allegations of misconduct are actually like an affront to the community, right? And your shared rules, and students are more likely to take it personally when they see that that's going on. So it's not so much you're in trouble, right? I'm sending you to the principal's office, but it's a conversation about, well, gosh, there's a loss here that we're kind of mourning because you circumvented learning in a way that's kind of held you back and it's impacted your peers. So where do we go from here? So it is a conversation that brings in the human in the loop and talking about how what we do and how we work and how we create involves and impacts those around us. And that may not be immediately clear with so many students taking online classes or classes that are remote. Even this webinar, we're seeing each other, but we're not in the same room together. But to understand that we are a community, we have shared values, and that, having something, relying too much on generative AI to do the work for you that doesn't accurately display what you've learned can impact all of that. And so having that open, honest conversation is helpful, and just really pursuing information literacy, media literacy, which can be a lot of fun, but having students involved in that conversation. I think, Bridget, you may have said this earlier, just recognizing the limitations. Like, yes, there are capabilities of the technology, but there's also a lot of limitations. There are hallucinations. There's a lot of implicit bias and discrimination that we can see coming out of it, and having students participate in that. Have students analyze content that's generated by AI pertaining to their discourse community, whatever that is, and then pursuing that as a research project. You drive this conversation. This is what's going on in the world. This is the technology we want to use. Well, let's use it, and let's look at it from every possible angle to get a really good sense of what it can do and where we're going with it.
I want to draw a connection to a link I just put in the chat from that the White House actually put out pre-launch of ChatGPT, which is the AI Bill of Rights, which is a very interesting kind of set of concepts about the use of automated systems. I think a lot of this is focused on kind of automated systems acting on humans, but I think a lot of it also implies to synthetic data or synthetic products produced by humans with automated systems. And one of those central principles is like notice and explanation of the use. And I think we are seeing a fair amount of kind of thought work being put into what transparent use and adequate notice looks like. The scripts aren't clear for anybody. I don't think, like on a macro level of like we all know what it means to do this well. And so I think investing time in some co-creation and things like that is certainly worthwhile, but we're quickly going to enter a world where we're going to want to have assurances about what kind of an agent we're interacting with. And keeping that transparency up front and making sure that we do have broad shared notions of what adequate notice looks like is going to be important on both like a macro societal scale, but also in classrooms, right? So that we have assurances about what I'm reading and what's going on here, so we can build relationships on those, which is the other point that I would mention. This is more from my personal experience. When I was a teacher, I taught mostly English language learners. And there were times where some of them used Google Translate, and it was fairly obvious. Not because it was distinctive from them, but because all of their errors were fixed overnight. And not one error, not a handful, all of them. And, you know, it quickly just, and like, I tried to always resolve these issues with very much on a conversational level, right? Of being like, hey, I want to talk about this product. You know, can you tell me how you came up with these ideas? Can you tell me what you were thinking? Can you tell me about, like, you know, and it quickly, you know, became into like, I didn't write. And I'm like, okay, well, like, let's talk about that then. Like, why? What pressures were you feeling? What did you want? And so, like, that relational aspect of it, I think, is central to this. It also takes a lot of time to have those conversations. So I'm not claiming it to be the most scalable method, but I think it is ultimately the most like holistic method of thinking about how we're relating with students and their, you know, their use of systems to generate synthetic content.
And when we think about, you know, every classroom is a community, right? And what we know about how people do or do not follow the norms of a community, that, as Margaret said, co-creating those norms and investing, as you were saying, Kevin, you know, having it is a lot of time. It's a lot of dedicated time to have these conversations. And so we encourage our instructors to spend the time, invest the time at the beginning, where you're co-creating these norms, where you are talking about what do we value as a community, where we're getting to know each other. So we're not going to be anonymous, whether you're in an online classroom or you're in an in-person classroom, that to sort of move out of spaces of anonymity where we are people to each other. We care about one another. It matters to me how this other person is doing, and therefore it matters if they are going to be doing things that are kind of against this culture that we're trying to create. So we always say that the investment of that time at the beginning of a semester or the beginning of a school year is going to pay off. It is not a waste of time at all to invest in relationships in the classroom. And again, this is where AI, I feel like, is pushing us in the direction of student-centered teaching, in the direction of anti-oppressive teaching and learning, and values-based education, because we know that that's how people learn. We learn in relationship. We learn when we are emotionally invested in the people who are around us. We already know that. And research and neuroscience tells us that. And so here let's do it. And let's make some of these norms about academic integrity, and let's help people understand, what does that mean here? And now we just have this as another layer. What does use of generative AI mean here as it relates to academic integrity? And we just come up with it together. And not because it's supposed to be punitive, but we need to create roadmaps for our students. And then when something comes up and somebody maybe uses things in the way that they're not supposed to, what are the consequences for that? And obviously every institution has their own policies that we have to be attending to, but I think within the sphere of our own educational spaces, whether that's a class or other organizations or whatnot, that we can work to create a culture where integrity is part of what we're doing together, and getting people to buy into that, even young people.
And I love that idea that we're doing this together. Oftentimes when we talk about academic integrity, it can become so easy to talk about the ways in which we want our students to be transparent, and we want our students to use academic integrity. But hey, it starts with us, and it depends on, you know, how transparent we're being in terms of how we're using AI to create rubrics, syllabi, or even I've heard of some folks using generative AI to grade their students' papers. I can tell you right now, my students would be deeply offended for very good reason, because they want that human connection. They want to know that their instructor is their mentor and their coach, and that is something you cannot replicate with machine learning, right? You can't replicate with the machine. So it's a conversation that is awkward, I'm sure, and difficult to navigate, but it's certainly worthwhile, again, to have these conversations. And students are very down for this conversation. They want to be in on it, and they want to know that I'm being transparent with them as to how I'm using it too.
So it sounds a lot like the conversation that we're having about AI is not actually about AI, but about people, which I personally I love. I think it's fantastic. I do have one more question though that I want to ask before we run out of time, and it does have to do with AI, and that is the question. It's come up a lot, and I was just at a conference where this was sort of a big topic of discussion. Where are educators in the creation of AI? Where are their voices? Where's their influence? So I'd be just curious, and this goes to everybody, and this goes to the audience as well. So if you want to chime in on chat, please do. What tools would you want to see developed? What's missing that's out there? What's too much that's out there? And basically, if educators were to make AI, what would be different?
I got a list, but I don't want to jump in, but I'll do it. Widespread free access to FERPA-friendly, privacy-minded tools. Thank you very much. That my minors can access without fear, please and thank you. I worry that we're going to soon see, and I think we're already seeing this push to use not the freemium, but the premium version that allows you to create your own chatbot. Isn't that lovely? But your students also have to pay for that. So that's not helpful. We need widespread access. We need it free. And if we're not going to make it free, I hate to bring up money, but we got to have the funding to make sure that we're not having gaps here in access. This can be a great equalizer. Let's keep it as a great equalizer and make sure that everybody has some exposure to it.
It's a good place to start. Other thoughts?
I'm thinking about, and we didn't maybe quite get there, about the personalization of education, and people have talked about students being able to use generative AI to help, create a study guide or to make a list of practice questions. And I think that, and I don't know enough to know how would you do this, but for there to be a way for students to identify and then share the way that they learn. I just saw something about neurodivergence and being able to articulate. So first discover and then articulate the kinds of learning that actually work for an individual, and then have a tool that's able to create whatever it is, study guides, flashcards, games, or something for that particular learner to be able to get at the content. So I feel like there's multiple phases to that. There's like the investigative part about how does a student learn, what works best for them, and then being able to input that into a tool that could help to create really a personalized kind of study guide or study buddy or tutor or something that really is personal. And so maybe that is not possible. And that is why we have, educators who are paying attention to each of their students, particularly, and trying to craft things. But I think that there are limitations on educators' time and an ability to attend to each individual student and what they need. So if there was a tool that could do that, I think that would be pretty amazing.
Nice.
So one of the pieces that I follow quite closely is research from the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, or DARPA. And DARPA is in the business of inventing the future. It's kind of their thing. And a lot of it is, defense assets, but they've increasingly been more interested in kind of human development, recognizing that they will need to kind of upskill their own workforce in order to maintain competitiveness. And there was one project that they were working on that I found just so fascinating, which was this heads-up display. So it's an AR environment that is scalable and that it's supposed to interpret in kind of a large language model sense what's in front of it, but specifically be attuned to low incidence, high impact events. And they were looking at this in the case of battlefield medicine, where there is no right answer. There's only just avoiding really bad ones. And I thought this was just so fascinating. And I was thinking about like the parallels here to learning. And I think one trend that I'm excited to see develop over the next several years will be immersive and augmented experiences. But ones that in a similar kind of paradigm are attuned to low incidence, high impact events, which is to help people say what you think you're seeing may not be what you're seeing.
Mm.
And in the case of the battlefield medicine, you're like, you think this is this kind of injury, but actually you're ignoring this very small detail over here that if you saw it, you would factor it in and you would know that you're seeing something else. And so this kind of perceptiveness of systems that help people make better decisions in their education and their training. It's not telling them everything. It's not totally like overwhelming them. Like that's something that I'm very interested to see develop over the next several years. And I'm curious, and I think it's crucial that educators be involved in that, because I think ultimately we want these systems to not stand in for educators, but replicate within their scope that kind of pedagogical assistance that you get from a good educator.
Yeah, I'm reminded of when I was in my graduate program, and I was taking a class on modernism, and we read Gertrude Stein. And if anyone's read Gertrude Stein, if you read her, you know she's difficult to read and to understand. And we were supposed to write a paper on one of the books or one of the authors, right, that we were reading. And I told my teacher that I was going to write on someone else. I don't remember who it was, but I was definitely not going to write on Gertrude Stein because I couldn't handle Gertrude Stein at all. And my teacher looked back at me and said, "You're going to write on Gertrude Stein." And that's a moment when, and I wrote on Gertrude Stein, and I loved it. It was an amazing experience. It opened up the text for me in a way that I wouldn't have ever bothered to open up the text on my own. And that's one of those moments when I feel like that's a teacher doing a teacher's job that I can't imagine an AI being able to do. Maybe an AI could have been able to help me access new ideas about Gertrude Stein or something like that. But it was that teacher who saw, you're going to struggle with this, but it's going to be good struggle, and you're going to learn from it. And so I think that's somehow I feel like that's related similarly to what you were talking about, Kevin, in terms of just being able to see things with a different kind of clarity than a student is able to because they're in the midst of it. Yeah, anyway, we are just about out of time. I just want to take a couple minutes just to thank you all for being part of this. It's been a fantastic conversation. I've loved every minute of it. I wish we could keep going, but people have to get on with their days. So thank you very much, Bridget, Margaret, and Kevin for being part of this. Really, really, really enjoyed it. And thank you everyone who attended. Some great questions came in, and there was a good discussion happening in the chat. So thank you so much, and I hope everyone has a great day.
Thank you. Take care.
Bye. Thank you.